Good afternoon, colleagues. Today, we continue the series of on transformational change management at university and college with PhD consultant and educator Alexander Gorelik. Alex, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good time of day to you, Ksenia.
Glad to talk with you again.
Absolutely. Good to see you as well.
Let's start. But in order to remind our viewer why we're talking about change management and what exactly we do mean by change management.
Well, that's a good question because I would imagine a lot of our viewers come from a technical background, from software development background, from IT background, perhaps. And so we need to make a clear distinction between two types of change that are typically meant when we talk about change management. When information technology literature discusses change management, they typically mean procedural change management. That's the kind of change that is exemplified by, let's say, a situation where a customer submits a help request or a help ticket or a problem ticket to a help desk, or version management in software development, something that you guys are familiar with at BIBJ. That's not the kind of change that we are talking about. The change that we are discussing is organizational change. That's the kind of change that is primarily about changing people's behavior on an organizational scale. So all the way from individual factors, how employees embrace change, how they think about change, how they make decisions during change, to the group level, how decisions are made in groups, how group members participate in decisions. What are the dynamics of decision making in groups between group leaders and group members? What is the information flow that is typically employed in an organization? And finally, all the way to the C-level leadership of the organization, because change is exemplified and led by, and to a larger degree implemented specifically by the C-level leadership of the organization. So the change that we are talking about is systemic organizational change that is about people and also about organizational systems of reporting, systems of relationships, systems of communication, systems of decision making, and systems of measuring, tracking, and using data to inform KPIs of that organization. So with respect to education, I think organizational change management is warranted because our industry is undergoing a huge change on three levels. We are changing the relationship with our market. COVID has changed that relationship forever.
Of course, yeah.
Our relationship with the students have changed, or rather, the students have changed their relationship with us. They switched, or they're currently switching over from long-term and long-form learning to micro-learning models increasingly, and also they have a lot more choices to go with, to be frank. Higher ed is not the only game in town anymore. And also these two changes prompted the third fundamental change, the change of the change of the relationship of educational institutions with their employees. the faculty and the administrators. And so if we look at organizational change management as a set of best practices that guide organizations in how they prepare, equip, and support individuals, their employees, to successfully adopt the change and drive organizational business outcomes continuously, then it becomes clear that when we're changing relationship with market, students, and employees, we have to look at change management. We have to turn to change management as our solution to these three problems. But again, the kind of change that we're talking about is not procedural change. It's not that we're just tweaking and optimizing our processes and procedures, although we do that during the course of an organizational change. But the kind of change that we're talking about is much more substantive, much more strategic. It's the kind of change that shifts the meaning of what the organization is about. But organizations don't change, people do. So on the fundamental level, this is about changing individual behaviors. It's about changing how your employees, each one individual, how they think about themselves with respect to their organization and how they behave with respect to their job responsibilities. That's the kind of change we're talking about, Ksenia.
Okay. Change management is a term that is popular in technology corporates lingo, but why we are applying in the higher education?
Well, to put it short, we are applying it to higher education now because we are too far into the change, and we cannot afford not to manage it. To be frank, we are, as an industry, we are very much behind the curve. We are behind other industries in that regard. We, for many years, decades, I would argue, higher education enjoyed a fairly comfortable, cushy, undisturbed lifestyle without having to adapt to major changes. I was reading a seminal book in education change management that argued that the structure of higher ed is hopelessly outdated and it needs to be reformed very, very soon unless we are heading for a major crisis. Guess what year this book was published? 1972. 1972. And the words, you could just cut and paste these words into any modern article on education management. So nothing has changed fundamentally since 1972. We are very much behind the curve, and we cannot afford to no longer to continue not manage the change. The change is simply too expensive not to be managed. And so it's too systemic to not be managed as a system. So to give you an example, one of the major players in change management consulting and certification space, ProSci, correlated data from over 2,000 variables over 10 years. And their studies show that the initiatives that manage change excellently on a scale from poor to excellent are 6 times more likely to meet their objectives than those with poor change management. So, as an executive, would you like would you like your initiatives to be 6 times more successful at meeting their objectives? Of course you would. By simply moving your project from poor to fair on this scale of change management, you would increase the likelihood of meeting your objectives threefold. McKinsey data, that's another one of the big four consulting firms, shows that the return on investment captured from excellent change management is statistically significantly more than that from the projects with poor change management. Simply put, we cannot afford to waste any more money and human resources to initiatives that don't pay off in education. And change management is probably the best way right now to ensure that. Change management, when applied effectively on a project or an initiative, significantly increases the success rate of that project or an initiative. But from a leader's perspective, there is an even better payoff if we move an organization from sporadic change management initiatives to a culture of change management. So if we look at organizational culture as having different levels of change management involvement, right? Where at the very lowest level, change management is sporadic and sort of haphazard. It goes project by project and is seen as a disruptor. Somebody comes in, manages change for one initiative, and goes away. And then the highest level, we move the organization gradually to the highest level where the change is built in to every level and to every role within the organization. And everyone's job responsibilities include anticipating change and being prepared to accept multiple scenarios of the future, because that's the future we will be living in education. The future is going to be very uncertain, very fluid, very threatening from the uncertainty perspective. And organizations, educational organizations that are equipped to be prepared for change will survive at a much higher rate than those who are not. The task of moving an organization from a culture of sporadic change or no change management at all to a culture of managing change, a culture of inbuilt capacity for change, is the number one job of an education organizational leader today, in my humble opinion. Of course, I am biased because I represented a consulting company that helps organizations do that. But I would argue that as an outsider looking in and experiencing the problems that my clients have in higher ed, I can tell you that this is a very, very acute problem that impacts everything from finances to recruitment efforts to faculty morale, which is an enormous problem, and it will continue to grow. And you can, as a leader, you can attempt to solve each one problem in separation, or you can try a systemic approach and rejuvenate restructure your organizational culture, reorient it toward being capable of anticipating and accepting change as a leader.
Okay, thank you so much. And Alex, who do you see as the change manager in higher education? Where will these people come from?
Yeah, that's another problem for education, because unlike software development, for example, right, we don't have an established network of standards and certification bodies and the flow, a clear career path where we can send people away. They will come back with certifications and implement change management in our organization. We don't have that for our industry specifically. So what do we do if we are an education, a college or university president? We look inward, we look internally, we look for people who have latent leadership skills. And here's what I mean, Ksenia. I want to be very, very clear about that. There is a temptation when we are short on cash, when we are strapped financially, when we are under stress. There is a temptation to say, "Well, I can't afford yet another team coming in and on my payroll and siphoning my resources. I simply assign this new fancy change management function to one of my most active, brilliant, and talented managers," right? Ksenia, you are my most active, brilliant, and talented manager. And so on top of your 10 job responsibilities, here's the 11th. You are now, congratulations, you are now a change manager, right? That would be a huge mistake to make, because by doing that, I am absolutely murdering you as a productive manager at what you are doing already, and I am producing a stillborn baby in the change management initiative, because you are going to hate it from the very beginning. And if you are going to hate it, everybody else is going to, because you cannot be a champion of something that you don't hate, that you hate. And that's the job, that's the number one job of a change management initiative leader, to be a champion, to be a promoter, to be a advertiser in chief for that initiative. And so what I would do, what I would advise a college leader is to look for people who may not have a formal management title, who don't have the word management in their title, but instead people who are informal leaders. Perhaps these are faculty who are highly respected. Perhaps
insight leaders.
Exactly. Insight leaders, absolutely. Perhaps informal leaders. Perhaps administrators who are young, cool, and popular. Doesn't matter who. The most important part is that they have to have the people skills, they have to have the charisma, and they have to be able to get on board with this initiative, to internalize it, and to sell it to everybody. They need to be able to lead. At this point, you as a college president don't need managers. You need leaders. You don't need people who manage at this point. You need people who can lead. You don't manage, pull. Leaders push. You need leaders at this point. And so don't look for people with management in their title or management in their background. You need people who can lead change management on the level of individual reactions, who can lead change management on the level of work roles and responsibilities, on the level of decision making and workflow, on the level of data, because change management today depends on the communication platforms and data that you guys provide on the level of communication platforms, on the level of stakeholder groups, and on the level of C-suite leadership.
Mm-hmm.
If such a person has a passion, a capacity to lead informally, and the intellectual capability, the political capability to navigate corporate politics and get the buy-in from the C-suite, you found your change management leader. But of course, change management is a team sport, right? Ideally,
Yeah.
you want to involve as many people as possible into the change management team, and there is a process for that, and I hope that perhaps in another conversation we will be able to talk about the specifics of who does what,
Yeah.
and who communicates to whom within a typical change management team, and specifically perhaps look at some case studies that Gorelick Consult has under the belt specific to change management. Specific to change management in education.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for interesting interview and comprehensive answer. In next interview, we will talk the roles, especially in these teams, and the responsibility, yes, that we need in managing the organizational change.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ksenia.
So see you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.